Okay, so I just pressed the go live button. I think we should be live at this moment or going live. It's um, still loading here, but if people are seeing us right now, I want to welcome everybody to another session of the Media of Things, where we are putting together and demystifying what media is and all the different components of media and giving it to you in bite-sized pieces. So today, joining us, we're very excited to have Jacqueline Frank, who is an amazing person who I've had the privilege of meeting and having working with her on a project. And Jacqueline Frank is a member of the Directors Guild. She was an assistant director, has played in many roles, mainly has based out of New York, but is living here in New Mexico. She's worked in the movie, she's worked in television, she has worked in documentaries, and has also has had the experience of training journalists worldwide. And that is a different topic that maybe one day we'll come back and talk about. So welcome, Jacqueline. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
I am so excited that you're here today. And I'm wondering, the business of film is the topic of today. And so I'm wondering whether you could help us demystify, the business of film and really thinking about like careers and like how people, having Netflix here, like what people do between television and movies, et cetera. So, but the first thing I want to know is, how you can break it down for us in a way that we can understand the production end of things.
Sure, happy to. So there's basically three different phases of when you're making a movie or a TV series. And roughly speaking, it breaks down to pre-production, also known as prep, production, which is when you're actually doing the filming, and then post-production, which is when editing and music, and if there's any special effects, computer generated things, those all happen generally after the filming has finished. And so pre-production, there's a lot of things that are the same between movies and television. The very big difference between them is a movie is a one-off project. The director has, say, they hire their key department heads to make sure they have the right look and feel for what they have in mind. They're very involved in the casting. In a TV series, once the format has been signed off on and it's a successful ongoing series, the directors come in and out. It's very much a writer's medium, and the crew is set, the cast is set. So the directors don't have the same amount of sort of power, shall we say, in a series as they do in a movie. So when a movie gets going in the pre-production phase, sort of the director starts putting together their key elements, which means their director of photography they hire, the production designer who's going to be responsible for the look of the film, the costume designer who also will look the look of the film, the editor who's going to put the film together, and music. Either they're going to be composing original music or they'll be they'll be using existing music. So either way, there's a person who's in charge of music. And they also pick their assistant director. That was the job that I would have. And then all of these people start looking at the script and breaking it down, figuring out what they're going to need. And if it's a script that is set either in the future or in the past, that affects, of course, budget and what you're going to do very much in terms of the look. When it's set in the future, generally that means that you're going to be building a lot of sets. So that means that the pre-production period is going to take that much longer because you have a lot of sets to build. It also means generally that it's expensive, more expensive. Building sets is always more expensive than finding locations. And then when you're doing something that's set in the future or the past, it adds expenses in every way. All the costumes have to be set in that period. All of the objects, all of the props, all of the vehicles. So it creates a lot of prep time to create all of those things, to find those things. And which is why a lot of movies are set more or less in the present because it's cheaper and it's easier. And you can find locations and use locations much less than building sets. So that all happens during the prep period. So if you're using locations, then you have a person in the production division, which is assistant directors. There's location people, and their job is to find the locations. And then you start looking at the locations with the heads of department, deciding if you think that's a location you're going to want to film in. If you think it is a location you're going to film in, then the location person has to negotiate all the deals. And you have to figure out how long you're going to be filming at that location. How many different scenes can you film at that location? Let's say, for example, you were going to film something at a ranch in New Mexico, but you also had some scenes that were happening in a kitchen, some scenes that were happening in a bedroom. Then you would want to see if in that particular building, you could film scenes in the kitchen, you could film scenes in the bedroom, in that house, would they work? Are they appropriate? That may not be. So you may have to you may film the outside of the ranch at one place and the inside of the ranch someplace else. And that kind of thing happens a lot. So also the sort of key thing that's happening during this prep period is that the schedule is being put together, the filming schedule. And that can be very complicated because you have to juggle which scenes are inside, which are outside, which are daytime outside, which are nighttime outside, and then cast availability. And casting is happening during this prep period, and actors have different kinds of availability. And almost all actors in most movies, except for small independent films, they're a member of the Screen Actors Guild. There's a lot of union rules about scheduling of actors, so that if there's too short a period of time between their appearance, you have to pay them for all that downtime. So you have to really kind of juggle their availability with the location availability, with whether you're inside or outside. And so everybody is figuring out all of this stuff during the prep period. And so that the amount of the prep period varies depending on the budget, depending on how complex the project is. If, for example, it's something where you have a lot of stunts, where you have car chases, where you have battle scenes, all these things kind of have to be planned and rehearsed. On the bigger budget films where they have big stunts and things like that, they'll do a video rehearsal of them during the prep period, so that when you get to the time when you want to do it, you can take a look at it, you can figure out what the complications are, and it helps you work it out in the time. Because movies are such big productions, they're very expensive, time is money. And so you want to do as much as you can to plan for as much as you can, because things always go wrong. It can be weather, it can be an accident, it can be a location falling through, it can be someone getting sick. All kinds of things happen, and you have to have plan Bs and plan Cs and flexibility. And sometimes you can't film at all for a variety of reasons. Either the star got hurt, or a snowstorm completely destroyed something, or a rainstorm destroyed something. So you have production insurance. Every movie takes out insurance, and sometimes you have to call an insurance day. And the insurance will then cover the costs that you're losing by not being able to film that day. So all of these things are going on during prep. You're casting. So each of these department heads now are hiring their departments, and they're assembling everything they need to do the shoot. So the costume designer is either making, acquiring, renting, buying, designing all the clothes for everything. The casting director is casting all of the speaking parts. Sometimes there's a separate casting director for the extras. Extras are people who are in SAG but don't have speaking parts. SAG has rules about how many, if you have crowd scenes, how many people have to.
Can you tell us what SAG is?
In SAG, can you?
Uh-oh. The connection has become unstable.
I'm sorry. SAG is the screen. I see that.
You're good. We're good though. We're good now.
So movies are we're good now. So there's independent films, and by independent, they'll usually mean that they're small films, they're low budget, and they're frequently done without union actors or crew. The kind of productions I'm talking about, so I'm a member of the Directors Guild, so I generally worked on union productions, which the majority of Hollywood movies and most of the TV series that you will see on TV, those are all union productions. So the unions cover everybody, from the director to the producer to locations to every member of the crew to all of the cast. And the SAG is the Screen Actors Guild, which covers all the actors who have speaking parts. It also covers extras up to a certain number. So if you have a big crowd scene, SAG will have certain rules about how many of that crowd, let's say 50, 75, 125 have to be SAG. And then after that, you can use non-union people as extras. And then you're supposed to place the SAG people in the crowd closest around the actors who have the speaking roles, so that they are most likely going to be on camera. And then the non-union people are further back. So there's lots of rules. There's rules about how often crew can go before they have to have a meal. And if they don't have a meal, then you have to pay a penalty. There's rules about overtime. There's rules for actors if they use their own wardrobe. There's rules called turnaround from when you finish filming to when you start filming the next day, that if you don't have the right amount of hours, you're paying penalties on that. And all these things, when you're figuring out the schedule and you're figuring out the budget, all these things have to be calculated. Every studio and network has their own, there's software which everybody uses, but the formats may vary from network to studio. So all that already exists. If you're working on HBO, you get the HBO budget software, and that's what you use to create the budget. It's per their specifications. And then your accounting department has their own software, which marries into that. And the accounting department is tracking all of the money, and there's a lot of money that's going around. They're setting up accounts for people so that they can get their equipment and they can rent things. And they have a contract with a payroll company to pay the crew, because everybody works essentially as a contractor. The only people who would be on staff would be whoever's working for the studio. But everybody who's working on the film has been hired for that project only. So now let's say you're building sets. So in sets, you have the production designers who decide what they look like. You have carpenters who build them. You have scenic artists who paint them and wallpaper them. Then you have set dressers who get the furniture per the production designer's specifications. That will mostly be rentals. Then there'll be prop people who get all the things, like if they were propping this office, they would get the computer, they would get the desk lamp, they would get the pens, they would get the desk chairs, they would get the set dresser would get the desks, the prop person would put everything on the desks, they get the books and the pictures. So those are all positions that are going on a crew. And then, and the location people, meanwhile, are busy securing all the locations that you've decided you want to be filming in. And you have, by now, you've created a schedule for when you think you're going to be filming at those various places. Schedules can change. And so the location manager has to be quite adept at dealing with that, of letting people know, no, we're not coming tomorrow. We're actually going to come next week. But, sometimes you have to pay them some extra for things like that. There's a lot of creative problem solving that goes on. So then eventually you get to the filming. You will probably have had, depending on the budget, depending on the director, there will have been some rehearsals with the key cast in most likelihood, just to go over the script and the character. There will have been several what they call production meetings, where the whole department heads go through the script together so that everybody can talk about concerns in their departments, things they're worried about that maybe haven't been thought about or addressed. So you try and anticipate all problems, all possible problems, and then you're filming. And you have a schedule, you have a full schedule for the whole shoot. You have a schedule for the week, and then you have a schedule for the day, and it's called a call sheet. The assistant director is responsible for all scheduling and generating this call sheet every day, which tells everybody what time we're starting the next day, who's in it, which scenes you're going to do, where they're going to be, what things they have to prepare for. Are you going to have cars? Are you going to have explosions? Are you going to have whatever you have to prepare for? That's it's always in the schedule. The call sheet is the most detailed schedule, but the more abbreviated weekly schedule will still give you the information about which scenes, where, and so people can be preparing ahead of time. And so then you're filming, and the days are very long. They're about minimum 12 hours usually, and frequently more. And that's kind of one thing you have to know about the film business is it can be difficult on a work-life balance, can be difficult on family life. Typically, if there are night exterior scenes that are being filmed, they get pushed to the end of the week so that you can go Friday night into Saturday morning, and then you have the weekend to recover, which means frequently that your weekend gets kind of wrecked. So that's just kind of the way it goes with filming. And then things always happen. Things go wrong, and you have to switch locations, or you were going to be outside and the weather is bad and you have to go inside, or you couldn't get the parking you need. Something always goes wrong, and you have to figure it out, and you try and hope and figure out that it doesn't going to cause too many delays. And then eventually, after you've finished filming, then there's the post-production, which is essentially just the director and the editor, unless there's a whole lot of computer generated imagery. Then there's an enormous crew working on that. And so sometimes post-production can take much longer than production, depending on how complicated the effects are that you have to do or not. And then there's music, and also depending on
that.
The director, some directors have very specific music ideas in mind, and they'll sometimes play something while it's being filmed because they want something to be done in concert with some music. Other times they'll have filmed and they'll kind of have cut it together, and then they'll bring in a composer to compose to the scene. And that's a specific skill of knowing how to compose to time. You have to do something that has 3 minutes and 20 seconds to it and has a certain feel. Some people will want to have a great soundtrack of using existing music, popular music or classical music. And then the music person is involved not only in helping find the right kind of songs, but they then have to negotiate the rights to use those songs, the publishing rights, the music rights, things like that. So that's a whole other part of the process. So that's why it can take a long time to make a movie. And this doesn't even include the period of time in which things are being developed, when people come up with an idea, or they option a book or a magazine article, or they decide someone's life story is great. That can take years and years and years of development before you even get to the pre-production phase. Now, television series like Law and Order that I worked on, they had come up with, Dick Wolf, the creator, had been a prosecutor, and that was his idea, to come up with this series that showed law and order, that showed the DAs, the district attorneys, and the police. So he came up with this initial idea. The first half of the show would be the police. They found the body, they had to find the person, and the second half would be the court. So when I started working on it in the second year, this was in New York City, most of it was shot on location. They had a few sets at that point in New York City at Chelsea Piers. They had the district attorney's office set, they had the police set, and they had a hospital set. But we were going to this great old courthouse, the Tweed Courthouse. But eventually, as the series kept going, they built more sets. So eventually it would be half in the studio and half on location. So the big difference between movies and TV is that TV, once it has a pilot and a successful series, there's an agreed upon budget and schedule. In Law and Order's case, I can't tell you the budget because I'm sure that's changed by now, but it was an 8-day schedule, 8 days of shooting for 1 hour and 8 days of prep for 1 hour. And the way we did that was there was one shooting crew, but there were two leapfrogging production teams. So while one team was with the shooting crew, the other team was prepping for their show. So as soon as show A finished, show B would start. So that way we were continually filming hour after hour. The crew was working continually, and it was just the production teams that were leapfrogging, preparing and shooting, preparing and shooting. So it was incredibly efficient, which I loved, of course. And they had, for example, in New York City, where parking is a challenge, in the location department, they had a whole cadre of people who were parking people. And what they did would be to go to a location that they knew we'd be shooting in a couple of days. And they would they'd get the permits from the city that we were allowed to park there. They'd put out orange parking cones. They'd have people sitting in their cars. And that way they could clear the spaces that we needed for the trucks and the campers. There's a lot of trucks and campers that are part of a film crew. If you've ever been around New York City, you've seen them around. It takes a lot of bodies to hold those spaces so that when the company shows up, they have spaces and they can just pull in and park. Not an issue here in New Mexico, but a definite, hugely important department in New York City. So with TV, the schedule is set, the time is set, the budget is set. So you really have to, as an AD, I had to schedule it literally to the minute and to know exactly how long that day was going to take. In movies, you do the same thing, but it's a one-off thing. Things can happen. Scenes take longer. You don't have an air date pressure. You don't have that same rigid system that has to be kept to. So movies much more frequently will go over budget because they don't have the same external pressure that a TV series does. Mm-hmm. So that's basically the kind of stuff that goes on to make movies and television. And there's every single kind of job position that you can think of. If you like office work, there's a whole production office that's running, that's generating all the paperwork and coordinating all of the departments, who's where, what's going on. That's a very important kind of information fulcrum in the middle of everything. There's, of course, the accounting department. There's the production department, which I was part of, which has to do with scheduling and budget and locations and things like that. Then you have the camera department. And that's usually a fairly big department, which has several assistant cameras. So sometimes more than one camera. There's a video person who does the feedback where you're looking immediately at what's being filmed. There's the sound people who are part of the camera department. There's the script person who does continuity. Costume departments are very big because they have, if it's a big cast, there's a lot of costumes to keep track of, a lot of people to dress. And then, of course, the whole art department, the sets, the painters, the props, the set dressers. So, and then there's the grips and the electricians who work with camera. There's a lot of different jobs on a set, before a movie, during a movie, and after a movie.
Wow. It's amazing. Thank you for explaining all of this. I mean, it's been so informative to hear about like all the different jobs and all that goes into it. And you've done such an amazing job at like in a short amount of time, to break it down, in a way for us to really understand all of the different jobs, that go into it, including continuity, right? So
yeah.
And I don't know if a lot of people know what continuity is. Do you have like a continuity story? Do you have something where like, something was a flop or something,
Well, no, it's continuity. It's classically, it's almost always a woman. And so of course it's been a position that isn't taken seriously in a certain way because it's something that a woman does. Ooh. But it's a very important position because most movies and everything is shot out of sequence for a lot of the reasons I was telling you, that you'll go to a location and you'll film all the different things you can do at that location, which may all happen at different time frames, different times of day, different times of the week. And so because things are filmed out of sequence, somebody has to be paying close attention to, if this scene happens this day, what were they wearing that day? And what time of day should it be? And they have to kind of keep track of clothing and time and sequence so that it makes sense. And then they also keep track of how a film was shot, because sometimes things don't work out and they want to go back and reshoot something. So if they have made good notes about how the film was shot, they'll be able to match it when they go back to reshoot it later. They're also timing how long a scene is going to play, because, and this is particularly important in television, because television also has a set time. You can't be like 61 minutes, can't be 63 minutes. And it depends whether it's a show that has commercials or doesn't have commercials. There's absolute standards on what has to be delivered. So the continuity person is also timing. And if something is going too long, so the script's going to be too long, they have to let the director know, and they have to figure out where they have to cut something to keep it to time. So they do all of that kind of stuff. They'll also pay attention to things like, if you shoot a scene and you're shooting lots of different angles of it, and somebody's drinking something, does the glass start to get less and less wine? Then if you're doing it from a different angle, you have to make sure to fill it up again so it looks always the same. Otherwise it looks weird. It's like jumping around. They have these different glasses in their hand, or they're holding a cigarette and they're not holding a cigarette, or they're wearing a hat and they're not wearing a hat, or they have a bag on this shoulder and then it's on that shoulder. So they're paying very close attention to that. I mean, other people are also supposed to be paying attention to that, but that's very much their job, is to really pay attention to that.
Wow, thank you. I mean, you have broken it down from all the rules and guidelines that, once we're in the production phase, and, what goes into it and how much time or how little time and how much people work, to all the job roles that are available in all the different departments that people do, to the budget. And also like that it's almost like its own little city, right? Where you have like, you have the office and you have the accounting people and you have the music and the costumes, and there's like a place for everybody, right? The creative people, and then like the people who like keep track of like, are they on track? The continuity people, the budgeting people, the scheduling, and also like location and location scouts. Like really, I feel like you have been super informative as far as explaining the whole business of film. And I really thank you for joining us today, and demystifying the business of film. So do you have any parting words before we go?
Just, it's a terrific industry. It's really fun. I loved it. The hours are long. The work is hard, but it's fun. So, and I think it's fantastic that Netflix is investing here the way they are, and there will be a lot of job opportunities, but you just have to know that the hours are long. But if you love it, like I did, you'll really enjoy your work. It's really a lot of fun, but the hours are very demanding.
Right. And if you're like directing, or if you're, depending on the rules you're doing, don't you work more hours possibly? Because you were
Actually,
like assistant director.
not in the same way, because they, for example, when you go to a set, the earliest people there are the production people. We're the first people there.
Right.
And then the next people there are hair and makeup, usually because hair and makeup takes some time, particularly for female actors.
Mhm.
So they're there usually a good hour and a half before the shooting crew shows up. So the production staff is there usually about 2 hours earlier than the shooting crew. The director usually shows up with the shooting crew, because they're there once things are getting set up and the lights are in place and the camera is there. So they may be, working at home thinking about what they're doing, but in terms of being on the set, they show up later than a lot of other crew get there, because the crew has to be doing all of this prep for the day, getting the equipment set up, getting things into the location, or putting things on in the studio. There's all kinds of stuff that gets done before the director shows up. Director shows up when things are kind of ready to go. And then they will have a rehearsal on the set, usually with the actors, and the stand-ins are watching, so that they're deciding how they want the camera to, how he wants to shoot it, and therefore how they're going to light it. And once they've decided that, Then the actors go back to their campers. They finish getting hair and makeup done. The stand-ins come in and they follow the action that they just watched in the rehearsal. And that way the crew can do the lighting and the camera work, and the actors are just getting ready. They don't have to stand around like that. So that's how that works.
Wow. Wow. It's so much. It's such a big production, especially when you're dealing, well, I mean, I guess depending on the budget, right? So that's everything depends on the budget, like how many people are going to be there and how many teams are going to be there, or, making something on a shoestring. And maybe and we could talk forever because there's so many questions, right? Like you worked on documentaries, and it just, and I'm not going to let you go yet because I really want to hear about even though I was signing off, about documentaries. Like documentaries, I would guess, have a similar format. Obviously there's always the pre-production, production, and post-production.
It's very different. The thing with documentaries is that it's a tiny crew. If a crew,
right, yeah,
because of the change in equipment, the way cameras have gotten so small and sophisticated. When I started working in documentaries, a classic crew was a director, a producer, a camera person, an assistant camera, and sound. Now, it's frequently possible for a person themselves to just take the camera and go out into the field and do their own camera and their own sound and do everything. That wasn't possible when I was starting because they were different cameras. They were film cameras. They weren't video cameras. So it was, but still, it is a tiny crew. And because you were filming reality, the amount of prep is very different. You had to inform yourself about the issue, whatever the documentary was about. You had to know about where you were going physically. When I was doing documentaries in other countries, there were all kinds of things I had to take care of in terms of equipment and customs and lodging and transportation. But all of the other things, all of the other elements were not really part, the prep is very different, and it's quite logistic, and there's nothing about there's no casting, there's no costumes,
right,
sets.
yeah.
So it's a very intimate, small filming experience, but it also is long hours frequently because you are trying to get as much out of the day as you can. If you're outside, you want to get every minute of daylight. If you're inside and you frequently have, limited, you can only be with this person that day, then you want to ask them every single question you can think of, so the hours are still long. What I loved about documentaries was there was a lot of fabulous travel that was involved, but also the content was so interesting. It was, it was always about things I was really interested in and learning about. And whereas the working on movies as assistant director was my whole kind of sergeant temperament, being very bossy and telling people what to do and being very organized. I liked doing that, but I also liked learning about something, digging into a subject and going on and having a small, intimate crew experience instead of a big, ordering lots of people around experience. I like them both, and I appreciated I could work on both. It is hard for me to say which one I prefer because they're both great in my
Right,
mind.
and they're different. Yeah, and they're different.
They're very different. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for that, because I was thinking like the pre-production, which I would call pre-production, but it's like a research phase, right? And a coordinating phase. And that would technically be like the pre-production, right? And then you go production. But then even with documentary, you still have somebody who might score the music, or who might
Absolutely.
the editor, right, would edit
Yeah.
and score. And so then you have the post-production. So
Yes.
the pre-work is really what's mainly different, and just obviously the crew, right, and the size of the crew, and obviously
Yes.
also the content, because you don't have a
Occasionally,
screenplay you're following.
if they're bigger, they'll have an electrician, they'll have a grip, depending on what it is they're filming. There will sometimes be a little bit bigger, but it's nothing like what happens on a movie set, which is just huge, enormous.
Yeah. Well, once again, I thank you so much for joining us. This has been so informative. I hope we can have another conversation, and maybe next time we'll talk about journalism, or, we hear about what you're up to. So thanks for joining us. And I put it on our Facebook page to let us know or comment any questions. I haven't seen any questions come in, but maybe because it's Monday morning and early, and there's still a possibility that people will be posting their questions. So if that's the case, then I'll shoot them your way. Okay. So thank you so much. And until next time.
Next time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.